Time for another edition of World Edition, and we'll talk about some of the issues going on in the world and see who else joins us on this particular day. I know I've got Dan Worthington with me, and we'll see who else decides to pop in as well. But definitely, we'll talk about some of the things that are going on in the world, and definitely interested in hearing folks that are listening opinions of some of the things that are happening. We know that Ukraine has claimed its first gains in its counteroffensive against Russia. That's right. So they are military commands that are reporting dozens of battles. And it does look like they have won some of those areas. And it does look like there is even some counteroffensives going into the country of Russia as well. So definitely looks like that is the direction that the war is going on. And that's a lot of that is taking place in Kiev. And I knew that we have actually a correspondent in Kiev. So hopefully we'll be hearing from him on the Ukraine Russia show on tomorrow, and that is Ivan, who oftentimes comes in from that particular city and is able to give us a firsthand account of what is going on in that particular area. There is definitely a lot of people that have been talking about populism and populism, not just in the United States, but around the world. And one of the leaders of that populism movement, unfortunately, has passed away. So Sylvia Berlusconi, the former Italian prime minister, passed away at the age of 86. But definitely, that is one of the things that he was known for, was being somewhat of a populist in his particular country and all along those lines. So definitely be interesting to see what folks say about him in memory and all in that space. Didn't have a chance to really follow his politics, but I would definitely be interested to hear from others that may have followed it more than I did. And apparently, thousands have been evacuated in the Philippines as the Mount Mayon volcano spews lava and other content as well. And that is going on actually even during this particular morning. And it is one of Philippines' most active volcanoes, but definitely it has erupted on this particular day. And in Australia, a bus carrying wedding guests rolls over in Australia's wine country, killing 10 and injuring several others as well. So that is something that was taking place in that area of Australia. And, a lot of people have been praising these kids from Colombia and all in that space. The mother apparently told the kids to leave the Columbia plane crash site for help, and that's definitely a lot of folks are talking about the fact that these folks survived in the Colombian jungles for 40 days, and definitely that was a major sacrifice. But the mom of the miracle Amazon kids survived the crash for 4 days, but told them to leave her to save themselves. And it's definitely a very parental kind of decision made by that particular parent. And I can definitely understand where, not being a parent myself, but having been a uncle, I can definitely understand where people would make that kind of sacrifice and all along those lines. In other news, we're seeing that the U.S. is aiming to rejoin the UN Scientific and Educational Organization to push back on China. U.S. has decided to rejoin UNESCO and pay back its dues to counter those Chinese influences and all along those lines. And the last thing I'll bring up in world news, and we may get to some United States news as well, is that Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's former leader, was arrested in a financial inquiry, and folks are saying that the arrest signals the spiraling destruction of the SNP and the stagnation of Scottish independence. But like I said, we'll be interested to hear what other folks have to say about this and other stories that are going on in the world. And by the way, I said that was the last one, but the last one I'll mention, and then I'm going to bring in Sasha Stark, since I know he's not the biggest fan of the UN. So I'm curious to see what he's got to say, both about the war in the Ukraine and all in that space, but also his thoughts about UNESCO and all in that kind of way. Because I know on several shows he's definitely mentioned thinking that the UN needed to be disbanded and all in that kind of space. But there is saying that a rise in the arsenal of nuclear nations, and China has reported a maximum rise in warheads. So the number of nuclear weapons held by major powers is rising, according to a think tank that is out there studying said kind of information. And Saudi Arabia has announced billions of dollars in investment deals at the Arab China summit, and apparently it signed a 5.6 billion EV deal as it has closer Chinese ties. So it's definitely doing some work in that space and all along those lines. So we're getting ready to bring in Sasha and the rest of the panel as well and see what everybody's got to say. And all in that kind of way, definitely want to hear from Sasha about what's going on. I did mention the counteroffensives there in Ukraine, but that news that apparently because of the Chinese influence, there is the effort for the U.S. to rejoin UNESCO, which is a arm of the UN, and all in that space. So I just wondering your thoughts about that, since I know that you in the past have said that the UN has lived past its usability and all of that kind of space. But I'm definitely going to bring in some of the other folks. But Sasha, what is your thoughts about this notion of the U.S. joining UNESCO?
I think what US has to do is to get out of United Nations, get United Nations out of New York and out of United States. This is completely impotent, corrupt organization that cannot do any good anywhere in the world, and there is no reason for this organization to exist because this organization was formed after Second World War, a so-called club of the winners, who were at the time United States, England, France, Russia, and China. And even that was somewhat artificial organization because already it was clear that Soviet Union will not be part of civilized nations after they created a blockade of West Berlin and in all respects were essentially fighting all decisions of that were proposed by United States, England, and France, for example. China was a fluke simply because it was a very numerous country. I don't understand how it was declared a winner of Second World War. That's unclear to me. Maybe this is a part of history which I didn't study properly, and unfortunately, therefore, missing something. But I don't see. Even with France, there are some questions how France became a winner of Second World War. But okay, it was at least part of Western civilization, and there was a General de Gaulle. Okay, so there are some trace of why France was part of the United Nations. China, I don't understand. Russia,
Russia.
so yeah, okay. So Russia was the winner of one of the winners of Second World War. However, um, even that is now a big question mark about validity of Russia's membership in not only Security Council but overall United Nations, because the member was Soviet Union. Soviet Union ceased to exist in December of 1991. So therefore, there were five members. Now there are four members. So Russia would claim that it became a successor to Soviet Union, but there were 15 other successors overall. Even Ukraine is successor of Soviet Union. So it is very unclear a mechanism through which Russia became a member of United Nations. Was there any vote to that effect? Okay, let's vote. Okay, Russia as the successor to Soviet Union will take its place in United Nations and Security Council. Let's vote. Such a vote was never taken place. So the while Soviet Union is no longer a member because it ceased to exist, we understand that. How Russia became a member, through what mechanism? There is no such thing. So therefore, all this organization, United Nations, is a hoax, is invalid, has to be not even reformed, but simply disbanded, get out of United States, New York, and in its place has to be created a real sufficient organization that can deal with the world disasters and calamities and so on. And the leadership obviously will belong to United States and its Western allies. China is a big question mark. Russia is out, and all these clowns from Latin America, Africa, Asia, or so on. Okay, they're not doing much in today's United Nations, and in the future, I'm not so sure even if you need them. But if you need, okay, so let get them in. That's my opinion. Ukraine is now on the verge of winning its war against Russia. Russia is doing tremendous atrocities. What's their goal, actually? One of the reasons why they started in the first place. I remember the 90s when Poland, after the collapse of Berlin Wall and Warsaw Bloc, the Poland, was much poorer than Ukraine or Russia, and they were in a despicable state of and they had several problems, yet they managed to go to shock therapy, and a few years later, about 97, they joined NATO, they joined the European Union, and today is a prosperous, beautiful country. And what Russia was scared that if Ukraine will move in the direction of European Union and NATO, then in 5, 10 years, Ukraine can become a prosperous, beautiful country. So the Russian people will say, Mr. Putin, look at what's happened to Ukraine. It's a fantastic country. It's a dream where people who were a few years ago were on the same level as we are, they're now doing so much better. What's wrong, Mr. Putin? We would like to know the answers. This is why right now, obviously the war will be over sooner or later, but what Putin is doing, he's disabling Ukraine by absolutely destroying its infrastructure, killing people. So Ukraine will become a prosperous country, not in 5, not in 10 years, but in 20, 30 years, when Putin will anyway will no longer be with us. Actually, I'm doing very healthy diet and exercises because I want to be alive when this idiot will be gone.
Makes a lot of sense. I want to bring in a special guest we've got. It actually deals with another part of the world that you are familiar with, that being Canada and all along those lines. But Jim Mosley is joining us today, and I did think that Jim would get a chance to join us, and he is an expert when it has to deal with wildfires. So definitely, Jim can even explain to us some of the reasons that these wildfires are taking place, and he has developed a patented product that is going to ease the damage and even prevent wildfires. So, Jim, I'll let you definitely talk about what you've got going on, since you are definitely involved in that space. And a lot of us are still dealing with the haze. We're even feeling it down here in North Carolina, where me and Jatovia are based. I know that Lee Newton Rhodes up there in New York has felt some of the impact. And of course, Sasha is actually living in Canada, even though he was born in Ukraine, and definitely did some work in Russia as well with some of their military in the past. But definitely share us a little bit about what's going on, and even some of the ways that NASA is involved in this fight. So glad that you were able to join us on this particular day, Jim.
Well, thank you very much. And Sasha, it was very interesting listening to what you had to say.
Thank you.
Yeah, from someone that's been around, that's seen, so many these types of amazing trends, that happen in wars and rebuilding after wars. My father actually helped President Truman reestablish the Marshall Plan throughout Europe. We're from Kansas City, and so my dad went to school with Margaret Truman, and I just find these things fascinating, how you can look and see these trends and, and hope for a future, in Ukraine. And like you said, 20 years or so, my work, I developed a 3,000 degree clear spray, and I wasn't trying to develop anything. I was actually, probably 10 years ago, I had gotten the licensing on a fire blanket that was being used, that had been used on the space shuttle. And, I was looking to design a new fire shelter for firefighters because around that time, shortly thereafter, 19 firefighters died under their fire shelters in Yarnell, Arizona. And so I was just looking to develop, get a spray. I wasn't looking to invent something. And but 3 years ago, we applied for the patent pre-pandemic. And then finally got it issued about 6 months ago. And what this spray does, basically, it lasts years instead of something like a gel or a foam that you put on the fire, as it's coming. And so it gives you preventative measures on structures and everything. That's about the product. As far as preventing wildfires, we'll never prevent wildfires. However, there's some interesting things happening out here where I live in Southern California. There's a major developer, and we're talking about, as well as my product, I have a retired fire chief of LA County Fire. Matter of fact, he was one of my original investors in my company, and then he went to work for me after LA County. And he does heat-censored exterior sprinkler systems, and they have a different type of fire retardant that basically lasts until the next rain. So that can go on vegetation and everything else. And so I think from a preventative standpoint, we're actually talking about creating entire areas for a city like Malibu along the ridge lines where these fires typically come over. Because in the last major fire, there was a fire out here called the Woolsey Fire. And there's 5 fire stations, well-equipped wildfire fire stations surrounding Malibu and Calabasas and some of these areas. And yet 400 homes burned to the ground in that fire. So there's just only so much, firefighters can do. And so by having a perimeter protection that could actually mitigate and slow down the fire as it's coming, in these different areas, I mean, when a fire is coming at 100% velocity over a mountain, it's traveling like 100 yards in 19 seconds. Okay. And that's the kind of fire that took out those 19 firefighters back in 2013 because they just can't outrun it and get to their safety shelters in time. So in that instance, they can't. Up in Canada, they did away with fire shelters. They say, well, if you look, altogether, they said I guess the point of view is if you can't outrun it, you shouldn't be there in the first place. In other words, you shouldn't be anywhere near that line of fire to jeopardize your lives. An irony is we tested for a new fire shelter that I developed up in Canada. That's where the U.S. fire shelters were actually being tested up in Edmonton. And actually at the university up there, University of Edmonton. And I was like, that's kind of an irony since you guys don't carry fire shelters up there. And but really, when you're talking about the fires up in Canada, I mean, that are just hundreds of thousands of acres that happen. I mean, they'll get up into million plus acres. The only way, you would ever have a chance at something like this is to set up, some type of perimeter scenarios. And firefighters are always, this is their business. This is what they're trying to do. And as far as NASA's always provided some type of, help if it's, being able to detect, and see what they're doing from space and all those types of things. But really, I just with my technology, all I say is that over 50% of the fires that destroy homes aren't even in the direct path of the fire. It's from burning embers that might be blowing miles away, that land on rooftops, get up under the eaves and everything else. So what I say is our product isn't fireproof. All I say is that if those 50% where the embers are landing on the rooftops, getting out through the eaves and everything else, are burning down that many homes, well, our product has been tested literally up to 3,000 degrees for 6 minutes, and at 15 minutes at 2,100 degrees. And the biggest thing I'm trying to get out there, Mark, is that it's a blind spot, because everyone's heard the term Class A fire rating, okay, and that's kind of a standard. Well, that is like an 800 degree test for 10 minutes, and we have that, and we have an extended, Class A rating, and that's good, for a house fire in the middle of the city. But I would bet, okay, and I'm not I would bet that 80% of the homes that burn to the ground in Malibu, some of the big ones around here in California, not Canada so much, because you have these gigantic forest fires that some of them don't reach even reach, certain towns or, heavily populated areas. Like our Paradise Fire that took out 6,000 homes just in a blanket fire within, hours. So, the really what you're looking at in these types of fires, what I say is, if our product is can sustain 2,100 degrees for 15 minutes, and you can put this clear coat on your house on wood or stucco. We're even talking to a major insurance company about treating their huge boats, their yachts, because they, anything fiberglass that works on. If you could do that, you can mitigate quite a bit of damage. So anyway,
Jim, just out of curiosity, and other people might have other questions as you were talking and everything. There's been all these campaigns against wildfires, and it seems like a lot of the wildfires are, accidental things that happen, but there are also intentional ones. But I was just wondering how much of the firefighter or the wildfires that you are seeing and observing are those kind of accidental wildfires that we often hear, certain advertisements about, and all in that space, and how much are maybe done more intentionally from what you've seen? Because I imagine, somebody throws a smoke butt out or doesn't.
Yeah. I would say, and again, I'm not an expert in that statistic, but gathering up from what I'm, used to or seeing out here, I'd say more than 50% are intentionally or accidentally, whatever you want to call it. There was one where there was a homeless campsite that was very close to a very populated area, close to the Getty Museum out here off the 405 freeway, and there was a little homeless encampment, and they probably had a fire trying to keep themselves warm. And then wind comes howling around and everything, and starts taking that, to to a whole nother level. There's trains that could spark up, something, and that throw off, something that could start a fire. There's a number of ways, but yeah, people throwing a cigarette butt out the window, and just carelessness. Nobody ever thinks of the magnitude of what they could start. They're driving down a freeway and do something like that. Just don't think. People that aren't thinking. And as far as just flat out arsons, by the way, there was another huge one up in Oregon, and where kids were shooting off fireworks. And it caused 100,000 acre fire. And so it's like, that's the kind of thing that does do it, and, unfortunately. So.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense and everything. You had also said that there were some thoughts you had about the different ways or some of the places that are more prone to having these kind of wildfire and polluting danger zones. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that, and then some of my other panelists may have questions for you as well.
You're talking about areas,
different
areas that may be more probable. Out here, it's interesting because I think one of the things that attracted me to doing something about this is a lot of the areas that I really love to go to in California. They're beautiful, resort areas, places that people love to come visit, and Santa Barbara, Malibu. These are, big spots, and like places you wouldn't think. You wouldn't think that in Malibu it could come down the mountain, cross Pacific Coast Highway, and burn multi-million-dollar beach. Okay, I've seen some kind of crazy stuff. I remember going to Brad Pitt's old home, getting called out there, and the home did pretty well. A lot of it was concrete and glass, but when the fire, and that was on the beach side, and the fire came down, burned both sides of all the vegetation around his home, then went out back and proceeded to burn down the staircase leading down to the beach that was wood. Okay. And it seems like kind of an interesting thing, but insurance companies don't cover, wood stairs that go down to beaches. And that was a very large staircase, and but I was in Colorado and saw homes, where it picked every third or fourth home and burned it down. And one home was gone, and the children's play set was unscathed, out in the backyard. I think any place around mountains where it can really rip, the winds can really rip, is where you're talking. And people love to build in those areas, areas that are close in proximity to wildfire, what they would call the wildfire urban interface, and they call that WUI for short. People love to build in those areas around trees. People don't want to cut down trees close to their house, that's why they move into those areas. And, but those are the kind of things that can take your house out. So.
Everything. We've also been joined by Shaquille. Not sure which part of the world he is at on this particular day, even though he is oftentimes reporting to us from Australia and all along those lines. We've been talking briefly to Jim Mosley, who has come up with a retardant to deal with smoke and fire and all of that. So I've actually found him through one of those media sources and everything, but he is definitely dealing in that space of trying to make sure that these fires are being able to be contained, because he has a patented product that he's been talking about as well. So I don't know if Jacoby or Dan or even Sasha have any questions for Jim, but definitely I'm opening the floor to any questions that folks may have.
By the way, Shaquille, we're talking to people in Australia right now. It's a pleasure to meet you. But we're talking to people because, Australia is such a huge wildfire area. And I have a person over there right now talking on that. I actually met with the head of parliament in the Fort McMurray area of Canada, several, just, pre-pandemic. And then it didn't go anywhere. Here you're meeting with the head of parliament and they're saying they want to open the world to you. And then, but they got a lot of things on their plate. And I think, again, how much, I don't want to go there, but, I think there's $5.5 billion worth of infrastructure resources that are going to be, towards wildfires in the U.S. But I would love to be able to bring my product to Canada and bring it to Australia. People like, places like that where it's just overwhelming devastation.
So I was actually only in Australia for the last couple of years because of COVID and the borders being shut. So I don't generally spend a lot of time there. But perhaps, Mike, you can pass my details on to Jim. I will probably have to leave this meeting in a real hurry because I'm waiting for something that I have to do. But if you can pass on my details, that'd be tremendous.
Yeah, I'll gladly do that. No problem at all.
And I can say to you, Jim, that in my experience, dealing with the politicians themselves don't get you anywhere. Just have a brief meeting with them and then talk to their advisors, because the advisors will make the stuff happen. The politicians are hopeless. They do as little as possible, in my experience.
Well, about 4 years, I got hugely politically attacked. I had some, competitors, and matter of fact, it was a city attorney out here, and just came out on the news one day and said my stuff didn't work after we had all our third-party testing, and we're in testing with Southern California Edison and everything else. And it turned out 2 weeks before he politically attacked me, he was raided by the FBI for a $700 million Department of Water and Power cover-up. And then last year, his office was fined. The city attorney in Los Angeles was fined $2.5 million, and he withdrew his race for mayor. And I got to tell you, you know, when you get into something like this, and I go, gee, I want to invent something that wants to help. Okay, and it ain't going to be perfect. You know, I'm not claiming it's going to be perfect, but it's going to do something positive. And then, to deal in those political arenas,
So basically, what you're telling me is that this California business as usual is what you've experienced.
Yeah, pretty
I
much.
spent more time in
yeah.
I spent more time in California than anywhere else, but I do have some great contacts there. So I'd love to introduce you to them. And I'm the president of Pacific Rim Chamber of Commerce and subcommittee president of the American International Chamber of Commerce. So I'm sure that we can assist you in some way.
Well, you know, I would love that. It's to be able to get the patent on it 6 months ago is a big deal. There's just no competition with a clear coating that you can mix with paint or stains and that'll last years instead of hours, like a foam or a gel. And you have intimate coatings that are colored, but nothing clear. And so I'm looking for. Obviously, I'm starting to meet with some major paint companies, things like that. And we've done some exciting projects. We did Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. You know, we did Miley Cyrus's house after her last home burned to the ground in Malibu. Chris Hart. There's, we've done some great projects, but now we're looking to go, global with it and go retail, wholesale, everything,
So I'll help you out on one condition. Wherever Miley Cyrus is keeping her music, don't paint that. We want that to burn down.
Oh, okay, no problem. And anyone anyone that has nasty neighbors, you don't want us to try. You know what I mean? We'll skip those.
That's funny.
And don't worry, Sasha. We'll get Putin's house. Okay, we just got to get me some security. Okay.
There you go.
All right.
Hey, Jim, just out of curiosity, how difficult was it before the pandemic? You alluded to it earlier, but for folks that are thinking that they have a patented idea, how difficult is it to get a patent for those that are watching the World Edition and saying, hey, I got the greatest patent, kind of like Jim does at everything. So how difficult was it in the past and how difficult is it now?
Well, it was interesting. I never thought I'd actually get the damn thing through the pandemic. It was almost 3 years. But I had I had a company called Procopio Law down in San Diego, and they handled WD-40, Qualcomm, major coating companies around the world. And it probably took, there's certain components, that were in my product that needed to be cleared because there was patents on those, and some that had been in aerospace, for years. And so I had to go through clearances to get, clearances for the proponents that are some of the components that are in my product. And so it was not easy. And I would say $50,000 later, because every time you have to make a change or do something, with a substantial law firm, and going back and forth with the patent office, it's $5,000. So that probably happened 5 or 6 times in those during that time. So it's not an easy process, but I knew I had something interesting. Do you want me to share with what the science is in about 30 seconds?
Yes, please.
Do you have time? So what I did is I took a super alloy called Inconel. And it's 5 times lighter than steel. Okay, and it has a huge temperature tolerance, so 3,000 degrees. Okay, I didn't invent it. It's been around for 40 years in aerospace, but I had it reduced down into a powder. Okay, and it became a nano ceramic. It was such a fine powder by the time we got done with it, because it had to be able to sustain inside of a liquid. Okay, and so what happens when this mixes together? And if you go to our website, you'll see pictures of the utility companies, and they have weed burners on a utility pole, and it's just glowing red. But as soon as they take the flame off, it just goes out like a trick candle. And the reason why is that nano ceramic basically expands horizontally across the substrate and just seals off the oxygen. Okay, and unlike, go ahead.
Interesting.
Yeah, unlike an intumescent coating that you see on buildings and stuff that expands vertically on the beam or something like that. And then it only lasts once. Once that expands in an intumescent coating, that's it. And major architects like the World Trade Center, SOM architects, say it's cheaper just to chuck the beam and put a new coating on it than it is to, you know what I mean? And so with our product, what it does is it expands horizontally, cuts off the oxygen, but what it does, as soon as it starts to cool, it goes back to its regular molecular state and allows that substrate, that surface area to breathe again. And that's really critically important for woods or stucco or anything. You want to make sure those things breathe, or fiberglass. And so, it could last over multiple burns. And the difference is, if a fire sustains, on a house or let's say just take a surface area, I don't want to guarantee and say, oh, wow, a wildfire is going to blow through and, it could get through the windows, which we have a solution for that as well. But, if it hits a utility pole and it's going through an area, it could last through several fires. Okay. And so that's the unique part. And typically, a fire doesn't just sit on a substrate for more than 5, 6, 7 minutes. Okay. It's moving, like I said, 100 yards in 19 seconds. So what happens is, in that situation, you could lightly sand it, power wash that, what's layered there, a bit of a char. You could basically power wash that off and repaint the structure, in most cases. So that's the uniqueness of it and how it works.
Yeah. Just quickly, you actually answered one of the questions I was going to ask you, which was about, whether it have to be replied after every fire. But when you say you could then repaint it, I assume that you'd be repainting it with the same, with your product again. How does it withstand, or what sort of degradation would it experience from other weather events? For example, in Australia, after we had those major fires here that was caused, in my opinion, by the Greens, but we won't get into Australian politics. We then experienced flooding, and so the news actually came over and said, don't celebrate that the floods are going to put the water out. The floods are going to put the fires out, because it could actually make it worse. With other issues that we're facing. So what would happen in California has very similar weather to Australia. What happens if you've got a flood or a fire and then a flood? What's the structural integrity of your product going to be like?
What I would say is that it's an amazing sealant. Okay. When you mix it with stains or whatever, you're going to see it on there. It's not a real shiny thing. And then, it basically, blends very well. It's not something that stands out aesthetically that would be an issue, but you can see it's a very formidable sealant. As far as protecting in floods, I don't know. It is extremely weather resistant. If some of the components were in aerospace, okay, so it not only will it protect up to 3,000 degrees and and then some, okay, which we have some the proof. By the way, just to let you know, Bonneville Power up in Oregon did a test. And I thought the test was going to be ridiculous, okay? I said, how's my product going to help with this, right? And they said, we're going to treat one utility pole. We're not going to treat the other one. And we're going to hit them both with a simulated lightning strike, okay? 500,000 volts. And I go, what, my product isn't that good. What's it going to do, And they go, well, we expect it to, still burst into flames. We just want to see if it's going to self-extinguish, like it did, on these other circumstances. And sure as hell, they hit these things, with 500 kV and they both exploded into flames. And ours self-extinguished within 10 seconds and the other pole burnt to a crisp. What I can say is Bonneville Power has still been testing it for 6-7 years in Vancouver, Washington, where they have 50 inches of rain and snow every year, and they come out with weed burners once a year, okay, and try to get it to light, and it doesn't light, okay? So that's what I can say. I can't say, that there was a huge flash flood, took your house out, and you tried to. I don't know, but that's some pretty good stuff. And just another interesting thing that I would have never thought our product worked on was there was, a huge snowstorm in Texas, a few years ago, and they said, that they had problems with those huge wind turbines, and those were freezing up. The actual huge propellers were freezing up, or they were holding ice, and that was causing fires in the in the engine engine compartment of these things. And so one of the engineers at Bonneville put his airplane, because he's a pilot, he put a couple of airplane props and treated a couple of the props with our product, and then went hunting for 5 days, right? And came back, and when he came back, the ice that on the untreated aluminum propeller just on the untreated just stayed on it. It was tough to scrape off, and the one where we had treated it just fell off. So these are type things that we're finding about the product that are pretty amazing. And it has some acetone in it. Okay, this isn't what you're going to throw on the trees. Okay, and it evaporates very quickly, acetone. But what they found was they could treat it in the winter. If there's light icing, that acetone kind of cuts through that, and it still allows them to treat, and service the poles in the middle of winter, as they're already doing other things to these utility poles. And by the way, when you asked about earlier, when you said, what about some of the intentional versus accidental fires? You've probably read the biggest bankruptcy, from a utility company out here was over the last 3 or 4 years with PG&E, and that was a $14 billion bankruptcy. And
that's been going on for like 20 years, hasn't it? I mean, every time I've ever gone to America, I hear about PG&E, or every time I'm in California, I hear about PG&E. So
yeah, and we're in testing with we've done some preliminary testing with Southern California Edison, and which was very successful. And they put a piece of wood on two pieces of wood on these grates, and one just turned to ash within 20 minutes, and our treated one sustained an hour and a half. And they just decided to turn off the burners because it wasn't doing enough damage after an hour and a half. So that's some of the really kind of cool stuff that we're doing right now.
Hey, Jim, for those that are listening, what would be the website that folks can find out about your material? And even though I used to watch it regularly, ironically, it's a program that Trump used to be involved with as well. At least I think he used to. But I was stumbling across Shark Attack. The Shark Tank yesterday. So I was wondering if your company or any of your products had even looked at that opportunity as well. Because like I said, I stumbled across actually somebody with a...
I'll get to... Don't refer him to Shark Tank or Dragon's Den. I'll get him some proper investors. Okay. We'll take care of him. He's appeared on our show.
Well, thank you. As a matter of fact, an old friend of mine, I was one of the founders. It was called the Entrepreneurs. Well, when I was part of it, it was called the Young Entrepreneurs Organization. Okay. And we were piggybacked by YPO. And then we got over 30 years old and we go, shit, but this is a lot of fun. Let's just, but we're over 30 now. Let's drop the Y. So now it's just EO, and that's kind of global now. And one of our members was Kevin Harrington, was one of the original sharks on Shark Tank. And I talked to him, and he said, "Nah, don't come here." So that was the right advice. But yeah.
You've slightly upset me here, Jim. I'm still technically in my 30s, just. So does that mean I can't say I'm young anymore? Because I'm over the 30 mark.
We kept doing that. We kept trying to play that and parlay that for 5 years. We extended to 35 years old and everything. Then we gave up and just dropped the Y. But as far as
so I'm old. I'm now the old entrepreneur. No. This is terrible. Dan and I are in the same
Hope
bracket.
springs eternal. Hope springs eternal. I'm actually 66, so I'm over the hill.
Well,
not yet, Dan. Not yet. Give it another 20 years. You can run for president.
Well,
there you go.
Well, as Rodney Dangerfield said, when I went to school, they didn't have history.
No respect. No respect.
So, Jim, how can folks reach you if they're interested in the product? That was the other part of what I was asking.
Well, our website is sunfiredefense.com, but my phone number, share it. I'll give it to you. It's 818.
No, don't put it out, Jim. Don't put it out on the air. You'll give it to us. We'll talk to you backstage. Don't put it out on the air.
All right. Okay, we can do that. That sounds like a plan.
Well, unless it's your company number, don't give out your personal phone number on air.
Yeah,
because this broadcasted by a few places.
You can find, we have a toll-free number, and then then my assistant will lead and get that out to me or whatever. So there's no problem.
Okay, let's put the toll-free number mark up on the up on the screen.
Number. Yeah, so we'll do that. It's like an 833 number. I never call it, obviously. But that would be great. I'd love that.
You've got to give it to Mark. We'll put your website and the phone number on the bottom banner for you.
I would love that, Shaquille. That would be great. It was interesting. One of my friends and contacts knows. You guys know Kool and the Gang, right? Mm-hmm. The big group Kool and the Gang. And there was the Kool. His name is Robert Bell Kool, and we were talking to him before the pandemic. And he was going to be doing a few big concerts over in Australia. And so we had Kool on the phone. And the deal is the concerts got canceled because of the pandemic. But, we were that was going to be one of the ways we were going to bring it there, because he was part of the reason why he was doing these concerts was to raise money for people who lost their homes and the devastation of wildfires in Australia. So, I know it's an important thing for you guys over there. So, but where's everybody else from? Jatovi, where are you from?
Durham, North Carolina.
Okay, cool. And how about you, Dr. Worthington?
Cedar Hills, Utah.
Cedar Hills, Utah. Okay, well, you got some fires there. And Sasha, where are you at?
Toronto, Canada.
What part?
Toronto, Canada.
Toronto. Okay, cool. Yeah. And Mark, you're based out of Canada.
Based out of Durham, North Carolina as well.
Oh, you're Durham. Okay, cool. Well, it's great meeting you guys. And sorry I was a little late. I couldn't, for some reason, I think when I cut and paste the link, there was a dot in front of it and it just wasn't connecting. I go, it's that one little dot at the beginning.
One dot gets in the way of everything. You had actually alluded to it earlier, and I was just curious because I know that sometimes when people are having inventions, politics can get in the way, and you've kind of alluded to it a couple of times, and we don't mind getting into the weeds and everything. So definitely, how much has the political minefield been a issue when you've been trying to get this patent on both either in California or in the other places as well?
Well, you'll love it. I had one day of bad press, and it certainly didn't come from any customers. I've never had complaints that we haven't been able to solve or anything, but it was interesting. In 2019, these guys, this Mike Fira, the former city attorney, basically just came out and said, my stuff not only doesn't work, it's flammable. Okay. And he said that it has acetone in it, right? The guys tested it while it was wet, and we proved that they tested. They said they admitted it, and they go, well, we didn't have the instructions. They're like, what do you mean? And they were asking for 10 gallons of my product to test. Okay. And our attorneys were like, what do you mean you want 10 gallons? We already have our third-party testing, Class A testing, okay, approvals. Why do you want 10 gallons of my product to test? We're in the patented process. And basically that's where it broke out. And we said, you could test it with a pint. You don't need 10 gallons of our stuff to test. And so we just... we fell into that, and they came out also and said, well, if by the way, one of the things they got me on, they were going to try to, that they were accusing me of, is unfair competition. Okay. You can read that. So all of a sudden I came out with something better than the competition, something that lasts 5 to 7 years. It's clear, not like a gel or a foam. And they said it's unfair competition. And they also said, if his product is so good, people will think they can just stay in their homes, okay, when a fire comes. Now, I don't know about you, but I got firefighters that work for me, and they would set me on fire if I was saying crap like that, and so
Well,
that's
the ridiculous thing about that is slightly before my time in the late 70s, I think it was. They wanted to impregnate children's clothing with a particular chemical. I'm sorry, I can't remember what the chemical is. But it was supposed to be a fire retardant chemical, and they actually passed a law, but it turned out that chemical was actually toxic to the kids. But assume that the chemical worked. Most clothing today has some level of fire retardant. By using their analogy, that would mean that people are going to say, my clothes aren't going to burn, so I'm just going to stand here in the fire, which is absolutely ridiculous. So,
yeah, and and it was just such a loose, absurdity. And by the way, we went through toxicity tests. A former EPA guy did our toxicity report. It says it. It's in our MSDS, our safety data sheets. It's but I never said acetone wasn't toxic. Okay. And it says that everywhere that it has acetone, and it's a flammable 3 liquid in its liquid state. But I'll tell you what's really amazing. If I take a paint stick and I do a demonstration in it, I go back and forth between the treated and the untreated area, and that treated area doesn't burn. Okay. You can smell it, and it just smells like your fireplace. You don't smell any. I can hold it right next to my face, and all I smell is just a fireplace. Okay. Just the smell of the wood, some of the charring, and that's it. There's no chemical off-gassing, and it's not saying that there's any harmful amounts of that, once it's dried and cured. Now, if I was going to go out and spray a house, I wouldn't want people, to be wandering around, without a mask on or something. And our painting, they're all our guys that apply it are licensed painting contractors. And matter of fact, that's some of what our model is. We're getting a lot of interest now, from painting contractors to apply it because they're already painting a house. If they can do it while in a wildfire area, the house is already masked off. The windows are already masked and power washed. They can do the further protection on their house. And then, we'd love to there's 180,000 volunteer and retired firefighters in America, and to me, those are the best salesmen because they're not trying to be salesmen. When they walk up to your door, they know what they're talking about. There's no fluff. And if it works, they get behind it and they love it. Okay. And I've never met one that's seen it.
I'll say to you, Jim, that if you're having issues in California or in the United States, there's nothing wrong with starting outside the US. Look, for me personally, I'm in finance. Okay. Because of regulations and laws in Australia. I know why they passed these laws. I know why. I know what they were trying to do, but the effect it had on a very young 23-year-old me, and more seriously, a 28-year-old me, was that I couldn't do what I wanted to do, and so I actually left Australia, and I found that I was very, very rapidly more successful when I left Australia. So, look, I can see already. I own a lot of greyhounds, and I own some racehorses. Something like the stables or the kennels where the greyhounds are sitting. We're talking about country areas. We're talking about, yes, they've got sprinkler systems and they've got all that sort of stuff, but this extra level of safety in those sorts of areas would be great. I have a lot of people that I know in the maritime industry, something like the application of this in engine rooms. There's all sorts of opportunities I think that you've got. And look, sometimes you try and do everything you can to comply with the rules and to be above board in your own country or in your own state. Sometimes it requires you to go somewhere else to get established before you can actually come back.
I'd love to hear that from, I'd love to have that discussion with you, and I'm very open to that. Yeah. And because this thing can expand like wildfire. I'm sorry.
Like a flood. Like a flood. But please pass on. Please pass on to Jim you've got my permission on air. Give him my personal mobile number backstage. afterwards, my cell number, whatever you call it there, and we'll talk.
That sounds amazing. I would, very much like
we'll
that.
definitely do that. And
Yeah.
just really quickly, because I know we're winding down, this has been a very interesting conversation with you, Jim, and everything. So I was glad we were able to get you on this particular show. But could you share just a little bit about your team as well? Because you did mention the folks that were involved that are past firefighters, and I also see that you have got some other amazing people that are involved in the team as well. So if you can just,
I will bid you farewell. Sorry, I will have to go. Mark, I need the link for Economics Monday. I've got to go. Sorry, good to meet you, Jim. It's good to see you guys.
Yeah, it was great.
Sorry, it's not today.
Yeah, they're doing a rerun because David Walker is not in town.
Okay.
Right, okay. Might have been that I upset the former Comptroller General with all my comments about how unfair death taxes are, but we'll leave that for another show. Okay, guys, I'll see you guys again. Good to meet you, Jim.
I like you already.
Take care.
Bill. I can't.
Bye-bye.
By the way, Jim, I'll actually be back in California in the next sort of 8 weeks or so we can catch up in person when I'm there.
I'm in beautiful Marina Del Rey. Okay, there's no fires here.
Oh, that's where I stay. That's where I stay. I stay in Marina Del Rey. Yeah.
I bet you're staying next door to where I live. I bet you're staying at the Ritz-Carlton.
Yeah, well, I either stayed there or I stayed at the Hilton, which is not quite as flash, but the Ritz-Carlton is my favorite. I've actually got a friend that lives in the building next to it. You probably know him.
That's where I live.
So
City Club.
the building next to it. Okay. Yeah, I've got friends that have boats there in the marina. So maybe we'll catch up and kill a shrimp or somewhere like that and have a. Yeah. Or I did actually last time I was there. I actually went a little bit further up, and they had the most beautiful seafood I'd ever had. So there's some great places around there. So
Yeah, it's awesome.
yeah.
Can't wait.
No, definitely. We'll stay in contact, Jim. Lovely to meet you, my friend.
Absolutely, and you're all welcome to come to Marina Del Rey. Okay, so
Sounds great and everything. If you
Yeah,
just share a little bit about the team, and then, like I said, we're going to wind down, but definitely.
All right. That sounds good. We have interesting people. One a very close friend of mine is Ed Heiner, and Ed Heiner was a Navy SEAL commander, and he's an established author. He has a couple of books out. One's called First, Fast, and Fearless, and a new one out called Guts. And I got to tell you, he actually, is a great person to have on my side through this whole political thing, because he just helps you think through obstacles, on a daily basis. When I was going through all my trials and tribulations, well, he was friends with Eddie Gallagher, the Navy SEAL that was getting prosecuted for murdering a terrorist. Okay. And he was visiting him on the weekends down in jail, down in the prison, at Miramar in the brig on the weekends. And here's a guy that killed a terrorist, and they thought he was going to get life in prison, after, and have that kind of thing happen. And that finally, blew by, and it was pardoned, and he's fine now. But you always have to take your own problems and compare it, problems of equal magnitude. I can say, wow, I'm going through this political attack. To me was just like the worst punch in the gut. I was praying for a heart attack. It was so bad and so difficult. And then I can't, coming through it, I come through it, but you're not used to it when your own government attacks, certain things and at your core. But if I was to go around to each one of the other, if I was going to Sasha and see what he lived through, in Ukraine and miles of fighting and wars and all this other stuff. Hey, man, I got a pretty easy life. Or Dr. Worthington, we all got these things. We've, lost, the closest people in our lives sometimes, and, or had everything taken away from us. And I know there's something about the human spirit that you just kind of keep moving on. You keep going. If you pray for a heart attack, you'll never get it. So, it's like, it'll come when you don't want it, or, something like that. So anyway.
No, I appreciate it. Definitely, like I said, we're at the top of the hour, so this has been a great show and everything. I don't know if Sasha or Dan have any last minute comments that they want to give you, and if you have any last minute thoughts that you want to share with the audience, I'll definitely give you a few minutes to do that as well. But definitely, you have any last minute thoughts? And we are scrolling across, as Shaquille suggested, the website as well as that toll free number, the 833 number as well. So,
well, wonderful. I don't know if I have anything to add. I wish I would have gone on a little earlier to hear about more of the Dr. Worthington, Sasha, and yourself. I'm always interested in other people and what they're doing, but yeah, I would let if you know anybody in a wildfire area, contractor, people that can make a difference. I would love to. That's probably what I'm looking for, is to expand what we're doing in a global way. And I think Shaquille is going to be very helpful in that. And so I appreciate you having me on.
No problem at all. So we're getting ready to wrap up the show. We'll be back tomorrow with more conversation around world events and world situations, and of course we may have some other special guests coming on in the near future as well. And Mr. Jim, you're always welcome to come back on to share more as to how the business is going and all in that space. So definitely, hopefully you'll be making a return trip in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that privilege. Cool. All right, folks.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. All right, take care.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.